Okay, welcome back to Chapters 4 lecture. Before we get started on that, I want to talk a little bit about your first assignment that is due. Basically, what I'd like to see you do is to find an article that's relevant to you in some kind of form or fashion that involves economic change or economic activity. Find the article, write a short paragraph or two, upload that into the assignment component inside your Moodle. This should not take you a lot of time. What I'd like for you to do is just find the article, write a short paragraph or two, upload it into the assignment portion of Moodle, and I'll give you a grade for it, and it'll kind of start you off on researching a little bit about economics. So we're moving on to Chapter 4, the market forces in supply and demand. What is a competitive market? What determines the demand for a good in a competitive market? What determines the supply of a good in a competitive market? How supply and demand together set a price of a good and the quantity that's sold. We'll talk about the key roles of prices in allocating scarce resources in the market economies. Remember we talked about the water and the diamonds, how diamonds are more sought after, so of course their price is higher. We'll talk about how economists use the model of supply and demand to analyze markets in general, overall, on the micro and the macro. In a competitive market, there are many buyers and many sellers. For the most part, the individual buyer, the individual seller does not have a lot of influence on the price, on the market price. However, as an aggregate or all as together, they can influence a price or influence the quantity being produced. The demand curve shows how the quantity of goods demanded depends on the price. According to the law of the demand, which you need to know, as the price of the good falls, the quantity demanded rises. Therefore, the demand curve slopes downward. In addition to the price, other determinants of the consumers and what they want to buy and what they want to use could result from their income, if they're employed, not employed, substitutes and complements that we've already talked about, and we'll talk a little bit further on about them as well. Expectations of the market and the number of buyers that are in the market. All of these factors can change the demand curves and cause the demand curves to shift up or down. Okay, so we talk about the supply curve. The supply curve shows the quantity of goods supplied, and it depends on the price. According to the law of demand, as the price of a good rises, the quantity supplied also rises. Therefore, the supply curve slopes upwards. In addition to the price, other determinants of how much the producers want to sell include such things as technology, expectations, employment, workers, in the availability of workers. And many of these numbers of things can make the supply curve shift up or down. So now we talk about equilibrium and the equilibrium price. This is where the intersection of supply and demand curves determines the market price, the price point, the market equilibrium. At the equilibrium price, the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied. The behaviors of buyers and sellers naturally drive the markets towards their equilibrium price. Products for high demand, will cause higher prices. Products with lower demand will cause lower prices. When it hits the amount quantity demanded and the quantity supplied are at the price point, that's when we have an equilibrium price. If the market price is above the equilibrium price, there's a surplus of goods, which causes the market price to fall. When the market price is below the equilibrium price, there's a shortage, which causes the market price to rise. To analyze any event and how it influences a market, we use the supply-demand diagram to examine how the effects will affect the equilibrium and overall price. To do this, we'll follow 3 steps. First, we decide whether the event shifts the supply curve or it shifts the demand curve, or does it shift both. Second, we decide which direction the curve shifts. Does it shift upwards or does it shift downward? And third, we'll compare the new equilibrium price to the previous initial equilibrium price. The prices will tell us where the demand is coming or the supply is coming. For every good in the economy, the price ensures that the supply and demand are in balance. The equilibrium price then determines how much of the good buyers choose to consume and how much sellers will choose to produce. Okay, so let's talk about the definition of a market. A market is a group of buyers and sellers for particular goods and services. Markets can take on many forms. Markets can be everything from international trade, it can be globally, it can be anything, agriculture, commodities. Markets can be huge, but they also can be a lot less organized. It can be as small as an ice cream stand. And I believe in your PowerPoint presentation we'll talk about an ice cream stand and how that kind of works in a little bit. But anyways, what is competition? What is a competitive market? It's a market in which there are so many buyers and sellers that each has a negligible price on the impact of the market price. Each buyer knows that there are several sellers from which to choose. Sellers know that each buyer's purchase only is a small amount of the total amount sold. In this chapter, we talk about the competitiveness of markets. And so what are the characteristics of a perfectly competitive market? The characteristics are that the goods being sold or offered for sale are exactly the same. The buyers and sellers are so numerous that no single buyer or seller has any influence over the market price. Together they would have influence, but individually they would not. Buyers and sellers must accept the market price as given. They are often called price takers. Not all goods are sold in a perfectly competitive market. For this example, for this chapter and for many of our chapters, we are going to talk in a perfectly competitive market sense. Perfectly competitive markets are easier to analyze because the buyers and sellers take the price that's given to them. But there's also what's called a monopoly market that many of you have probably heard of. And a monopoly market is a market where there's only one seller. All markets somewhere or another fall between perfectly competitive markets and monopoly markets. And so we'll talk later on more about the monopoly markets as we go. But let's go ahead and start talking about what drives the market. What drives the market, of course, is our demand and our supply. So we've got to talk about our quantity demanded and our quantity supplied and the shifts in those different curves. So first of all, the quantity demanded, which is the amount of a good that buyers are willing to purchase at a certain price point. One of the most determinant qualities demanded is the price of that product. The price drives the demand of the quantity. The more something costs, the less we want to purchase it. Quantity demanded is negatively related to the price. This implies that the demand curve is downward sloping. If you remember the law of demand, the claim at the other things, all things being equal, that the quantity demanded of a good falls when the price of the good rises. So we also have to look at the demand schedule. A demand schedule is a table that shows the relationship between the price of the good and the quantity demanded. Because some of the degree of competition happens in most markets, many of the market lessons that we have learned by studying supply and demand are generally under perfect competition. So we do have to look at those and see how they're affected. Let's take our ice cream stand example. If we gave ice cream away for free, we would have a request of 12 demand. We would go out of business. We wouldn't make any money. If our price point was too high and we said we wanted $3 a piece for each piece of ice cream or scoop of ice cream, we would have no demand. So our supply would go up because we would have too much more. So what you would look for is an equilibrium price, and you can see it there in your PowerPoint. So the graph of the demand curve and the relationship between the price of the good and the quantity demanded. The price is generally drawn on the vertical axis. Quantity demanded is represented on the horizontal axis. Market demand versus individual demand. The market demand is the sum of all individual demands of a particular good or services. So all the individual demands added together create your market demand. The demand curves are summed horizontally, meaning that the quantities demanded are added up for each level at each price. The market demand curve shows how total quality demanded of a good versus the price of the good, holding all other things constant, how much the consumers are willing to buy and how much they're willing to pay. That's how we describe the demand. Next, let's talk about the shifts in the demand curves. Because the market demand curves holds things constant, it may not be stable over a matter of time. We have to look at other things that could cause shifts.